chaired by Lieutenant General Mr. Arun Kumar Sahni and Ms. Bahar Dutt. This session will focus on exploring the role of media. Ms. Prerna Singh Bindra, Mr. Nimesh Ved, Mr. Samrat Chaudhary, Mr. Bobby Datta Barua, Ms. Ruela Count, and Mr. Amit Patro. However, before the panel discussion, we are going to have a speed talk by Ganga Limbu, who's from KTK Belt. So, Ms. Ganga, please come up.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'll just take over as the good army man. We'll request people to settle in. And we have two more invitees here. Some of the names are in a manner that there's been a little change in the panel. So may I invite two panelists who are going to join up. I don't know whether their boards have been paid. We have Mr. Naresh Mitra, who's a senior environmental journalist, and Mr. Pavan Kumar Das, again, who's been with the Vivekanand Kendra. May I request you also to please join us here. And in case you don't find your names here, please don't worry about it. Just take a thing and just cover that up. As far as the session is concerned, before both the chair and the co-chair say a few things, we'll start the session with the speed talk. We have Ganga, who's already here with us. And I'm sure she can tell us a little bit more about this Belt Youth Fellow, which she's been working with, which is extremely good. But from what I could make out, at a young age, she's been really steering a lot of activity in that part of the area as far as conservation is concerned. Her IKP portal is functioning or has started off. Her knowledge about the native flora, fauna, and I think Nepal's renowned for, she's been working with all these photographers and the filmmakers. And last year we were very fortunate to have a gentleman who was looking after making this open university in the eastern Himalayas, would also come from Nepal. So great to have you here, Ganga, and over to you, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Balipara Foundation, for inviting me to speak.
You need to put this on here, the mic. Your mic's not on.
Is she audible?
Hello?
Yeah, now better.
Just speak loudly.
Okay.
Speak louder.
I am 20 years old, rural youth, a female, a community member, a daughter of a landless farmer, but also someone with a deep interest in anything technology related, whether it is learning about software or taking apart a computer. You can count me in. As the first youth fellow of KTK Belt, I began my tenure about 2 years ago, a period I recall when I couldn't even write an email. However, during my first assignment, I was handed a GIS app in iPad and told me map the vegetation along the trails of Yangshila's forest. When mapped, I began researching about these plants in different scientific databases, journals, and plant dictionaries. And within a few months, we had documented over 660 types of unique plant species across Yangshila VDC. A database that we have turned in a plant app since then. Slowly but surely, I began noticing the patterns in the leaves, the habitats of snails, different types of frogs, the presence of dragonflies in river stream, and other natural events. Just a few years ago, I would have run past these habitats and ecosystem, not noticing or caring about any of the details. Last year, I was asked to develop an indigenous knowledge portal, and I began filming farmers and collecting stories about native plants. For me, each of these farmers has been a professor. Even if they never set foot in a school or know how to read or write. In the duration, I have learned to record videos using DSLR cameras, learn about aperture, shutter speed, ISO, good thinking to make photos, different types of lighting, like soft light, hard light, and also recording audios. Additionally, I learned how to edit videos and photographs using Adobe Premiere Pro, Photoshop, Illustration, and InDesign. However, mostly importantly, I learned to sit with the farmers hours to end, to record their knowledge, and through them began to learn about the intricacies and depths of indigenous knowledge systems. Through these moments, I grew a deep admiration and humility towards their knowledge. It was through generations and generations that these farmers had collected this knowledge, which they were passing on to me through the portal and through the portal to the next generations. For the past few months, I have also begun training other youth from our community in the process of documenting and editing. We are now building a database of over 600 videos in collaborating with youth from the community, from the 6 regions of the KTK belt. To document and share this knowledge with a wider community, we also building an online portal where we will be storing this information. It is only if we save indigenous knowledge that people will care about protecting biodiversity and natural resources. They are two sides of the same coin.
So anyways, to get the ball rolling, I'm going to be very strict about time. I'm sorry about that. We've got virtually 10 people here on the panel, but I'm going to request you to keep your inputs very short and limited and concise. Also because I want to open the floor up for discussion. We've got a lot of talent in the room and we want you people to contribute on this issue of storytelling. So without much ado, I'd like to start by introducing my co-chair, Lieutenant General Arun Sahni. He's going to set the agenda very quickly about what this panel is going to be about and a few opening remarks.
Yeah, thank you very much. Firstly, a warm welcome to all the panelists here. The first question which comes to everybody's mind, what is an army guy doing out here? And I just wanted to share with you, I commanded 3 corps here in the Northeast, so looked after 6 of the 7 states. I retired as an army commander. And I'm a good friend of Ranjit. So Ranjit said all generals, when they retire, they only tell stories. So that's why he's fixed me up to be in the storytelling session now. So looking at, well, that's on the lighter plane. But I think this actually is a very exciting subject. Today, when you and I look at it and just look at, irrespective of the generations, you look at Born Free. If you talk about movies on wildlife, Born Free comes in, 101 Dalmatians, Mowgli and the Jungle Book. If you talk about books that were there, you've got National Geographic, you've got the Panchatantra tales, you've got Tarzan and Jane from the comic book era. But what did it do? It made us aware from a child, when we were a child, how to harmonize ourselves with nature and to realize the great and sensitive interplay that exists between these two. And I think conservation has been a great story of media. And this panel of ours is very fortunate. We've got people from the print media, visual media, people who are in the social organizations, people who are making movies and documentaries. So I think the whole lot of them will be able to tell us things that how can we now look at using this portal to be able to change the mindset of people. I just want to share with you one quick one which I got about 2 days back, one of these WhatsApp social media messages. What was it about? A crow, a story of a crow. If you tell anybody, do you know about the story of the crow? He'll tell you about those pebbles and how water goes in and how water rises and then he drinks. No, this was about the crow in the urban area who realized that when he picks up these nuts, how does he crack them? Yeah? So he makes use of this hard tarmac, throws it from the top. When it doesn't break, he puts it when the cars are passing by so that it gets busted there. Then he goes and eats that thing. So if the crows can change, I think we can change the human beings for sure to start getting more aware of the environment and start looking at conserving this very, very critical environment of ours. So where do I want to start off? I think I'll just pick 2 or 3 issues. Social media has taken over the norms, how people read and understand and interface with knowledge, because of the ICT revolution. So I think we need to start looking at app-based activities which will ensure, and I can see the Elephant Foundation, what this young lady Ganga has just done there to do the engagement from the bottom up, is the area that you and I need to look at, that there's a changed spectrum of people and population, so we need to see how to do it. So you have storytelling, you have apps, interactive apps, and then you have the social organizations who do street plays, who do these various events in school. I mean, just look at this UN Awareness Week that happens in schools today, mock UN. Why can't we have mock environmental forums being run in schools at a national and at an international level as a competition? So that is how you're going to do it. Subjects have already been introduced in the school. So I'm not going to take too much of time, but to say that this is a fantastic medium. It's been a success story wherever it has been used positively or negatively. It's worked in both ways. But so I think today, this platform with these people, as my co-chair had said, let's not waste time on looking at it. Let's flag key issues and then have takeaways for us to be able to share it with the people who are going to make and execute it later. And the last thing that I want to only say out here is that irrespective of the medium that you come in, I think you and I as citizens of this country owe it to ourselves to be making people aware wherever we have a footprint of influence. So I mean, one is the formal methodology, one is your and my social responsibilities as good citizens. I think environment has to be taught and talked about with the people whom you can influence so that they do the right thing. Crackers stopped in Delhi in the last 5 years because kids decided dads can't bite. I want to chalao the phuljari, but my daughter says, excuse me, please. I mean, you're on the wrong end of the stick here. So that's what change is being done by awareness. So with that, I'll hand over to my co-chair, and then we'll throw it open to all our panelists here to start sharing their views, and then let's take it ahead.
Thank you, Arun, so much. I'm sorry I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Bahar Dutt. I've worked as an environment editor for the last decade with a news channel in Delhi called CNN News 18. Since the last year, I've turned author, columnist, now working on my second book. I want to confront the elephant in the room today. I know we spoke of elephants in the morning and briefly touched upon it in the previous panel with Ravi and Anish. The elephant in the room is this story called... I'll manage. Yeah, is the story of growth and development, and I talk about it particularly because we're here in the Northeast right now, which is slated to be the powerhouse of the country in terms of all the mega dams which will come up. I talk about bedtime stories here because, and I've sort of flagged here my favorite childhood books of Enid Blyton's, which we all used to love. But the point which I've tried to make over here is, yes, storytelling, yes, positive stories, but do they impact conservation policy? And in my role as a journalist, I've always tried to question that. Do our stories change things on the ground? And for me, I do hope through this session we can sort of highlight that. How do the stories that we do impact conservation on the ground? And you know, if you're a student of conservation biology, you'll be told that you have to escape the evil quartet through habitat degradation, fragmentation, invasive species overkill. These are the 4 causes, as they say, of extinction. What I found when I started in the media was that we were only focusing on individual animals, overkill, which is of poaching incidences. But the first 2, habitat degradation and fragmentation, we somehow never spoke about. We tended to ignore it. I mean, animals and plants live in habitats. And until we talk about that story, we're not impacting conservation policy. And I, through my stories, always try to do that. I want to throw some figures here, make this a more political debate, because I feel conservation is set in a political environment. This is a graph which shows forest diversion under UPA government. Prerna served on the National Board of Wildlife. She knows, the functioning. Mind you, this data which I'm showing you here is not data, this is only the data which comes to the Ministry of Environment and Forests. There is also state level data which is for forests that are diverted under 40 hectares. This looks like a pretty graph, but what it's telling you is 333 acres of forests are diverted every day. And diversion, I think, is such a harmless, it makes it sound so nice, diversion. It's actually decimation. It's decimation of our forests, our wildlife. And as I said, it's not just under the UPA. This is data fresh out of the oven, as they say. The last, the FAC meeting, for those of you who don't know, this is the Forest Advisory Council. They get proposals and they have to decide which forests are to be diverted. And this is the states and the reasons for which they're being diverted. This is in the last meeting. And you may have heard newspaper reports about 92,000 hectares of forests are being spliced open for development projects. You're all familiar with this, 600 large and small dams on the Ganga. If you're thinking it's for people out there, no, it's to support our lifestyles in the city, our carbon-intensive lifestyle. So it's all linked to what we do. The Northeast, where we are right now, this is a dam in, the dams in Arunachal Pradesh. If all the red dots here represent dams. So this is what development projects every 20 kilometers along the Konkan coast. This is thermal power projects which will release water at much higher temperatures back into the waters, which means that the fish there will die off, affecting local livelihoods. I'm going to very quickly play a video. I don't want to take up all the time. I know I've taken advantage of being the chairperson here, but I'm going to show you a very short clip about a story I did in Meghalaya. This is a cement giant, which was, can we have the audio for that, please? Who had kind of just lost her way and made her way to this factory. We were shocked by the fact that the EIA said this is agricultural land, which is okay, in the Northeast that happens, forests are agricultural land. But the fact that the 100-acre mining site is barren, rocky, and wasteland, it was simply assumed that no journalist would ever travel to this far-out area and expose them. So I'd like to hear stories now from our panelists on the stories that you do, and how difficult is it to do enviro-political stories which question the existing pattern of growth, which question politicians. How easy or difficult is it for you?
I think, Nimesh, we'll start with you.
Yeah.
We'll start one end to the other.
Yeah.
Just introduce yourself. I'm sorry I left that out because we were such a large panel.
Yeah.
But as I said, he's moved in from the commercial world into the conservation world, so he's got the best of both. Yeah.
Hi. I'm Nimesh. I enjoy writing, and I've been writing both on topics on my experiences that have been very pleasant and on issues that have troubled me quite a bit. So there have been a set of experiences, like you were talking about habitat. Now, when you talk, if there are stories or if one has written about a specific species, it's easier to sell that story to the, whether it's a magazine or a newsletter or a website. But let's say we're talking about mining in Garo Hills,
Yes.
or limestone or coal or the rat hole mining, or we're talking about more recently oil palm in Mizoram, northern Mizoram, especially about Dampa in north and Nengpoi in south. And then you face this barrage of questions. What is it? If there are 5 tigers inside Dampa, would they not survive if there is few oil palm? Or what will happen now? We're not looking at this connections. Now, when I say that, for example, continuing on Dampa, that Dampa was a large landscape, and if we are going to have oil palm in the manner that we are having, it will just become an island. Those kind of stories are very difficult to negotiate, to get into.
So Nimesh, explain to us, when you say it's difficult, is it that the editors are not interested in the stories or the readers are not? How does it work?
Can I just interface? I mean, I'm not really worried about the problem. Let's look at the theme of this talk, is to see how can we utilize and what should be the themes. One point that came out from yours is that you have to be knowledge-based to make a story be authentic and to hit the hearts. That's what you said, I think, if I understand that. So I think let's look at the fact that how do we see, how are you going to really deal with this issue of correct themes, engaging with the editors, ensuring that the people whom are receiving it the right way. I think let's keep that as the theme, then we'll be okay on the points here. Case in points are umpteen, we all know the problems.
No, what I meant was a particular lens of looking at conservation issues rather than this. So what I have been trying is to weave these into some kind of stories or a larger narrative where you talk about like what we call the sandwich approach, or the mirchi ka pakoda as we say in Delhi. That you talk about some positives, you bring out that these are these issues, and then again you close it saying that this is a major question that we have now. Do we want to be pretend to be ignorant of what is happening, or do we want to walk the talk kind of? So that's what one tries when it was, and that has worked quite a bit. But if one tries to focus on this issue and get into the depth, then the editors are not interested. It's too dark a story, too much of questioning, troubling people. Readers are not interested to be troubled.
So what worked in the palm oil story? Because I read some of the work that you've done. What worked in that? The fact that there were tigers there, or what else?
Oil palm just came in so big a way, and I guess the surprise factor. Like even some friends from within the conservation fraternity saying that, and this whole line of oil palm inside a tiger reserve.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's...
And questioning terms like buffer zone, we are making all these buffer zones and all these n number of terms that we have in tiger reserves, like I was discussing with Sandeep in the morning. And yet you have oil palm all across. So what is the meaning? So those kind of hard-hitting statements, and yes, tiger helped.
Hi. Hello. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Amit Patro, editor of Sikkim Express. I come from Sikkim, a small and beautiful Himalayan state in the northeast. And as you mentioned earlier, unlike other states in India, Sikkim is one of the few states that implements its laws and policies 100%. Like if plastic is banned in Sikkim, it's like banned. You won't find plastics, you know. If smoking in public is banned in Sikkim, it's like seriously banned. You're fined heavily if you're found smoking in public. So as a media, to strike a balance between developmental requirements of humans and advocating environment protection, you know, we have to do it in a way that, like, what we do is like whenever there are policies of the government for environment protection, like Sikkim is an organic state, plastic is banned, we give total thumbs up. And whenever there are like policies which affects the environment, we criticize them heavily. So in Sikkim, we as a media organization focus on sensitization and encouragement aspects more. Perhaps the absence of hard news is a blessing for us, as it means the plenty of spaces available for stories on environment conservation and sustainable activities. Sometimes we have as much as 20 small news reports related with plantation drives in a single edition during the monsoon. Then comes sustainable tourism through homestay and village tourism. We do our part by doing stories on homestay and village tourism, wherein the local populace are encouraged to develop sustainable, environment-friendly tourism products, as the ecotourism is the new currency for the people. Media has an important role to play in the field of environment conservation. It is a vital responsibility that has been thrust upon the media, but then again, this is the fight that media this time cannot fight alone.
Great, sounds
I
good.
want to ask you, sorry,
Yep.
I can't help but ask you, but I know you've been saying there have been positive stories, but you've also got the Teesta Dam coming up. There have been violations which have been recorded. There's, you know, you have the affected citizens of Teesta who've been sitting on a hunger strike. How do you cover these kind of stories? Does it become tricky because it obviously upsets the government?
We see.
What do you do as a journalist?
No, we send reporters at the ground.
Yes.
You know, we send reporters on the ground. We criticize the project developers and the government whenever they are violating all the MOUs. And like, I'm telling you, like MOUs are violated like openly, broad daylight.
Give us examples.
Yeah, but what has happened is, like, you know, Sikkim being a small state, all the landholders, in practical what is happening is, the land holders are getting very, very well compensated for the land which they would never get a price for. They're getting 5 times, 10 times the price. So what happens, the local populace, like, unlike other projects, they want the project to be implemented because for the kind of compensation they're getting for the land. So it's like, that's the reason why Act failed.
Right.
You know?
Right.
So it is, again, to strike a balance and to fight with the landowners, like the local population where the project is going on, and giving, and so our role is like to educate them on environment conservation.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think you raise a valid point. I showed this particular Lafarge story because at the time that we showed it, they had said that there's a ban and we managed to stop the project. But within a few years, the local community there wanted the project and they came forward and it became famous in the Supreme Court as the Lafarge judgment because what the court basically ruled was that the community recognizes this, they want the project and therefore finally it was allowed. So it's a tricky one, yes. When money is thrown at local communities, what do they do?
Especially for the land which they would have never been able to sell it,
Yes,
you know.
yes. So moving on, you've had a chance to speak, Gaga, so I'm going to come straight to Ruela. If you can give us, for instance, how does the mainstream media perceive the Northeast? Do you think the stories that come out from mainstream media make a correct assessment of the problems of the Northeast? And what do you feel as a filmmaker?
Okay, first of all,
Go ahead.
is this better? Okay, so
Just hold it close.
yeah, hello. So first of all, I feel a little outnumbered on this panel because I am not from the mainstream media. I consider myself non-mainstream creative media, at least that's what I'm aspiring for as a filmmaker. I do believe that there has been a lot of focus on the Northeast in the mainstream media, but its perception is different because it's always considered an exotic entity on its own. I'd like to talk about how creative media maybe perceives the Northeast. We have so much focus on the Northeast as a tourism destination. We see it as a, incredibly cinematic landscape where so many TV shows and, all of that are starting to come here. We're also, of course, as a biodiversity hotspot is gaining a lot of traction in the media. But then I'd also like to say that, and this is something that I've seen, while a lot of people are interested in the Northeast and there's a lot of focus, there isn't maybe a cohesive platform where, for people in the industry like me who are aspiring to actually find mentorship and the correct guidance and the nudge in the right direction so that, we're able to be far more sensitized to a lot of issues than we are probably.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I think I'll come back to that because I think it's a huge digression from what you're currently speaking about. So
I think the lack of mentorship in the Northeast, I think that's a valid point. Moving on here.
Yeah. Can I just leave one point? If you see today how media is played positively, just look at it. Swachh Bharat Abhiyan here. It's a success story here. People have got aware. I mean, the girl child, save the girl child, that's success here. So I would look at it that, is it there, what should be the fundamentals that you should be able to pursue or highlight as in the domain that you work in, whether it's print, whether it's documentary. Yes, problems are there. Sustainable development wouldn't have been a problem and wouldn't have been a UN goal if it wasn't really an issue. The issue is there, that do I do development or do I look after the environment? I mean, so how do you do the right balance? But I think what is most important from what I could make out from the theme is, how do you increase awareness in the people down below? If there's awareness, then you'll find a solution. If I'm not aware of the problem, then how do I do it? What she has done by showing that there were rules and regulations being played around showed that I think policy regulations need to be a little more strict. And something which I wanted to share earlier is that all these armchair intellectuals that function in environmental bodies sitting in Delhi without visiting on ground are not the right guys to make the policies. Here you don't, like in a supply chain, you require a last mile connectivity. Here I think you need that bottom upwards connectivity to understand the problem at the sharp end. And that is what is lacking in our awareness campaign. So the people here sitting who are going to be policy makers somehow are totally divorced from the ground reality. They only look at statistics. This map of Arunachal has been on for the last 35 years. What progress have we done on that? 1,000 megawatts of power. Nothing has happened. We've not even gone even into 5,000 megawatts of power. So are you getting my point? So just don't flash these to create confusion, because then a lot of projects get stopped. So what I would recommend is see in your area, how can you increase awareness and what should be the theme that you should adopt. I'd leave it on a positive note.
So far as what's called mainstream, oh sorry.
Yeah.
It's working? Hello? Hello? Yeah. So far as mainstream media is concerned, vis-a-vis environment, Northeast environment, I won't say it's in the center stage, it has occupied the center, but it's moving upward. A lot of change has been there. And in the mainstream media, if you say locally, there has been a perceptible change, the way media looks into environment. Because over the years, there were certain changes in the narrative also, environmental issues narratives. Yeah. See, in the 90s or late 90s, up to late 90s, there was a kind of cringing for development, Northeast being lagged behind. You don't get good projects, you don't get, you want dams and whatever. The media was mostly focusing on this thing. From 2000 onward, you see the narrative started changing. I don't know, environment politics also started coming out in a big way, and the media there has a big role. For example, the anti-dam movement, it's a big media issue. So far as locally, if you see the anti-dam movement is a really big issue, and media is going after it. So that's what
So we have precisely 10 minutes left and 3 more speakers. So I'm going to request you to all make it very brief. We'll go like this.
Hello.
Samrat. Yeah.
Hello? Yeah, hi.
No, it's working. It's working. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, my name is Samrat. I used to be an engineer and then I became a journalist. I edited a few newspapers in Delhi, Bombay and Bangalore. And now I've moved back to Shillong, which is my hometown, and I'm planning to start something there. So, in my experience, because I was on the other side of it, I was the gatekeeper who had to sort of let stories into the paper or not. It's not a matter of one person or even a group of people deciding things. It operates within a certain sphere, if you like.
Yes.
And so that sphere, what determines that sphere? So for example, I think you're several journalists over here with great deal of experience. I think everybody is aware that it's very difficult in the mainstream media to run stories which are not favorable towards big advertisers. That would be a career limiting move if an editor were to let such a story into the paper. There is also, of course, the broader sphere, even bigger, about what is desirable, the philosophical construct, if you like. And that is about a rhetoric which sort of is essentially neoliberal in character. It valorizes progress and development in a certain way without bringing in questions of values and even of ethics. And those are relevant concerns. What we have right now is a situation where everything is determined by numbers.
Yes.
For example, to bring it back to the media, the success of a story is directly determined now online.
Number of Facebook
number of hits, number of likes, number of this, that, and the
Yes.
other.
Yes.
Now, if you actually think about it, every year Google and Yahoo bring out lists of the most searched people in every country. And every year in India, Sunny Leone is number 1. So
We need to get involved with the environment, I think.
that's a great solution, sir. So that's how it goes. So it's always the bottom line and the lowest common denominator which is going to determine things. What can we do to think about it in a more positive way? I think that there are cases where people do seem to get interested in stories of broader concern. Pollution is something. You mentioned Diwali. So suddenly there was such a lot of coverage that the din of the coverage was greater than the din of the crackers themselves. Sometimes you get other things like that. For example, on that odd-even scheme in Delhi, also you got an enormous amount of coverage. A lot of it was hot air again contributed to global warming, but some of it was useful. It does build things. So if you bring it to human interest, to things that people themselves are worried about or concerned about,
I think that's
then
a
you get
valid
something.
point. Yeah, human interest, and how do you link environment stories to people and to local people who live around there? And I think a clear example in the air pollution case, and no one picked it up in the Northeast, the fact that you guys don't have monitors here. I'm sorry we're digressing from biodiversity and moving on to air pollution, but I just feel it's a story waiting to be done. The fact that the Northeast, I think there is one air pollution monitor for 6 states or 7 states. So this is a story just waiting to be done.
We are fortunate here, because you don't have roads, so you don't have pollution that's happening. That's a catch-22.
Okay, moving on to Prerna now.
Hello, I think this works. No?
Why don't you take that hand
So I'd like to just make 2 or 3 quick points. One is
Prerna, I think it's got
That's not working.
They just switched off.
sorry. So the first point we are here in Assam with a lot of representatives from the tea industry, and I would like to bring up one person who played an influential role in my being in wildlife, is EPG. And he wrote a book called Wildlife of India, which I read, I don't know, ages ago, maybe 20, 30 years back. And I'm just saying that to bring home the power of the written word. And somehow I feel that as a business, as governments, as NGOs, as media, we don't invest in environment journalism. In the media, in terms of investment, in terms of funds or time given to journalists. As NGOs or governments or even businesses, conflict, we spoke about it in the morning, with elephants and leopards, impacts the tea industry. So why is it that you're not talking to conservationists, or it is at a very, and talking to the media, the way conflict is portrayed or how it can be minimized? That's one. So that investments, but having said that, it has changed. When I started about 20 years back, 15 years back, I was told by the editor whom I'd gone with stars in my eyes that I wanted to write about wildlife and environment and conservation, and I thought I would change the world with the power of the pen. And I was told, "Arey, जानवरों के बारे में लिखोगे?" Very famous editor, you would know him if I named him. He said, "इसके लिए हमारे पास कोई जगह नहीं है, पैसा नहीं है, कुछ नहीं है, तुम फिल्म cover करो." We only cover wildlife, and the tigress has come in the zoo. And we send a photographer for it. And today we have, environment editors like Bahar, who have so you have a dedicated environment desk. Having said that, we are putting environment into a box. Environment stories, conservation stories, wildlife stories are boxed. There's a little box called environment, soft stories dumped into that. While environment impacts health, we are talking about health issues, air pollution, health, pesticides, health, loss of forest, loss of water, environment costing 5.7% of our GDP. It's an economic story. It's a political story. So I think media needs to recognize that. The third and last point that I would like to make is, it's a dangerous job. We don't realize it, especially when we are talking about questioning development, questioning this kind of stories. Bahar have done both of us have suffered from the Goa mining industry. We were both slammed, brought into threatening situations. The Pulitzer Prize, the think tank has called it the new era of science. It's a new frontier, environment journalism. We are losing them because, see, it's a battle over natural resources. When we are talking of stopping a mine or questioning a mine or highlighting a mine in a critical tiger habitat, elephant habitat, natural habitat, it's control over land, it's a huge investment. Yep. And journalists are being killed. They've called it the new frontier of war journalism because of the number of journalists we are losing and environment activists we are losing. So we need to recognize its reach. We need to recognize its importance. It's linked to others. It has to be mainstreamed. We cannot put it in a box called environment and soft, it's a soft story and sideline. That's all I'd like to say.
Thanks, Prerna. Prabal, last but not the least, we'd like you to speak.
There's a caveat here. I'm not a working journalist anymore. And I got the invite, and thanks to Bobby, who's over here somewhere, I got a chance to speak. I've been based in Guwahati most of the long career that I had with journalism. And I just wanted to share a few vignettes. And one very important factor that we need to figure in when you are in the Northeast is that it's a fantastic assemblage of people. There are more than 220 languages and dialects. When you do a story, you need to factor that in. I belong to Guwahati. I might go to one place. I might look at that place from my perspective, my jaundiced vision. Something is missing. Things are getting lost in translation. There are beautiful people. There's this Naga people, the brave Nagas, right? There's a segment, there's a clan, if I can put it that way, among them. It's called the Zeme. The Zeme got a wonderful phrase. It's called Here Liube. Here Liube is something which doesn't translate that well into Assamese or English. I go to your place, you offer me food, I am hungry, but me being a Zeme with that philosophy, I won't consume as much as I would like to or my body would require. That's Here Liube, wonderful philosophy. That's what you learn being a journalist in the Northeast. I've got a friend, he's a young friend, and staying with him, working with him, I'm beginning to gain back my innocence, which I lost as a journalist. His name is PNL Ang Nume. He belongs to the Hiraka faith of the Zeme, the same faith which was promoted by Rani Gaidanliu. Heard of her? One of the foremost nationalists Nagaland has produced. Not many of us do. But these are stories which might be peripheral, but when you communicate with these communities, you get to know their worldview, resource use, sustainability. These are ingrained in their cultures. So when we try to understand the environment or the environmental issues of the Northeast, let us try to connect with these communities. It's a wonderful learning experience, trust me. I have traveled due to my job, I was trained abroad. But Northeast is the place where I am learning new things every day when I go inside. Just make it a wonderful opportunity, because there is another ethical dimension to it. Languages are dying. Dialects are dying. And with that act, that disaster which is happening, worldviews are dying. Traditional knowledges and practices. You know, there are communities in the Northeast who can treat you for rabies. The single most important shaman, the medicine man, don't call him a quack, he is able to treat you across Northeast, and the most potent disease is, I don't know for what reason, they treat rabies the most. That is traditional knowledge, that is traditional practice. The next Rabipur is 16 kilometers away or 20 kilometers away before you get the first shot. The medicine man is just a bark away. This is just 2 minutes I just shared, that we need to engage with the communities if we are serious about conserving parts of the Northeast. It cannot be, as our gentleman has said, it cannot be a top-down approach. Things are getting lost because of our disengagement with the communities. We need to engage. And there's this beautiful 2 words, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the world is my family.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
We just got to open it up. I know we are very well said.
So are there any questions, comments? Very quickly,
Yeah, please.
because we're eating into our lunch break now. Oh, there's another part. Sorry. Yeah.
General Sani, I just wanted to take you up on your first comment, which you started off with. What is an army general doing over here? Recently, last summer, when I was at Dimapur, I ran into a retired Air Force officer who now flies helicopters over there, and we went birding together. And he was introduced to birding by a common friend. and he told me all the exotic places he has been to. And I mean, since that day, I've been sort of thinking that, you see, the Army is obviously an absolutely great resource for us. But I think the Army can also, or the defense personnel who are posted in some of the most remote places, most exciting places, if we actually incorporate about the environment, documenting species, etc., into part of their coursework, which I'm back in Pune now, so I thought I would take it up with the NDA as well. It could be an excellent resource for not only academic work, but it would add an extra dimension to life in the defense forces. In fact, one of the best books on snakes that I've seen across the world was brought out by the US Marines. And in our own civil services, Anwaruddin Chaudhary, one of our colleagues, he's actually documented wildlife in Assam by getting posted in some of the most remote corners. So I think the defense forces can play a very, very positive role in terms of sensitizing us about environments in some of the most remote and valuable corners of our country. Thank you very much.
No, I totally agree. I have to share with you that I think when I was a youngster, the World Wildlife Conservation that came in for the animal kingdom, I think the armed forces was taken on board. A lot of us got trained as youngsters, went and attended courses, and when I was here as a youngster, I remember doing that here as well in the Northeast. So I think you're absolutely right. You take it ahead, and let me tell you, there are a lot of stories that you see here. There are equal amount of stories that come out in the Army magazines of people who have stayed here. I have the present GOC who's here of 21 Division, was a kid in the area of Ukhrul. So he'll tell you about the plants and the flora, fauna, which he saw as a kid here, where he grew up, then he was a brigadier here, and now he's a general officer commanding in this area. So you have a great amount of say, and I think, yes, one of the reasons why I'm involved is we try and push it so that we can get more and more people in the Army, more sensitized in a more formal manner. We do it in a very informal manner.
Okay, we have another question there.
I'll just make one comment to that. Actually, today there are also a lot of citizen science portals where the data can be entered. So I think if that can be sensitized as well, it will really be accessible to a lot of people.
Okay, very quickly. Yeah.
Okay, I just want to reflect back on the last speaker and where he mentioned about the sensitization to the people of the region. And this is something which really irks us, that mainstream media intends to club us at Northeasterners, and you know, we're a very proud lot. We really take our tribe identity and we take our clan identity very seriously. It is still an intangible heritage that we still abide by, and so if media could take note of this, we don't want policymakers in New Delhi sitting down, giving us policies which they think is right for us, with no members from the Northeast represented in these bodies.
Absolutely, I agree with you. That's a fact.
Very valid point, and it's something we keep telling our editors in Delhi as well. I mean, I had an editor, again, I don't want to take his name, who confused Assam with Shillong.
Yes, absolutely.
So I had a tough time explaining to him.
So these things are very sensitive to us, and I think 90% of the people of the region who are here today would agree with me on that. Yeah. And we want to stick by our identity and cultural pride. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
We had a question there at the back. Any more questions?
Hi.
Yeah.
I have one question.
Yeah, and we've got two ladies at the back. Quickly, yeah.
So in this panel, I can see that all of you are telling their story, right? So is there any way by which we can promote, what's the responsibility of the people like in print media and the audiovisual media to promote people like Ganga, to tell their stories?
Yes.
I think if we can convert this table and have half of the people who are telling their stories rather than telling our story rather than their stories, I think we can think that we'll be able to bring out the serious conservation issues, and I think that those will be more validated and more reasonable than we telling their story.
There are two initiatives which are on right now to address exactly the point which you raised. There's something called the Green Hub in Tezpur, which is to develop filmmakers from the Northeast to tell their stories. It's a great initiative. Check out their website, Green Hub. It's based in Tezpur. There's also something called the Pari Network. Has anyone heard of them? People's Archives for Rural Stories, which is run by P. Sainath. So if I go to an area and I document an indigenous person's story, the byline doesn't go to me. It goes to that indigenous person. So it's a fantastic initiative. Check out the their website as well. I think the social media, we talked about the evils of social media, but social media is also a great leveler because it's changing the way mainstream media works. Sorry.
Thanks for the opportunity. I would like to bring this major issue to the notice of the people from the perspective of property rights, which somebody has mentioned. From the perspective of an IP analyst, intellectual property analyst point of view, happened to visit Meghalaya, Assam and Arunachal while having to study about the biodiversity of Northeast. And as the name says it, naturenomics, neither nature nor economic part is complete without the inclusion of property rights. So what I'm trying to share here is another story that's waiting to be done is the Biodiversity Act. The website says, there are so many management committees. Actually, how the top-down approach is, we have a National Biodiversity Authority at the national level, the State Biodiversity Board at the state level, and at the grassroots, biodiversity management committees are supposed to register the biodiversity.
Yes, the People's Biodiversity Register. Yes.
So far, we have seen, and whatever conversations we had, both with the communities and with the officials, they say that the biodiversity management committees are not functional.
Yes.
And this is one of the main reasons why, the transnational, boundaries, the endangered species, the crossing over, the rights of the community is being misused, and literally things have vanished. And I think this is a major story waiting to be done, somehow has missed the attention of the policymakers sitting out there. And I think we need to give it adequate attention, both from economic perspective and from the perspective of protecting the traditional knowledge and biodiversity. Thank you.
Hopefully there are journalists in the room who will pick up that story. There are biodiversity registers which are supposed to be maintained, even those aren't maintained.
So you've got last one more point in comment and then we'll call it out.
We have to wind this up.
Yeah, my question is to Amit. We all know that the Sikkim government makes it very popular that Sikkim is a 100% organic state. But isn't it also true that this is not because of the current government who's been there for many years? It's because the people of Sikkim they've always been cultivating organic produce. And also the produce that has been coming out of Sikkim is organic, but there is no certification body that is certifying it as organic. So it is fetching the same price outside Sikkim, let's say in Siliguri, as non-organic produce that is coming out. And why don't we see more critical stories coming out of the state that criticize the government or the dams there? Why is it that always reporters from other organizations go into the state to do investigative stories? And also the second point, the Northeast being unsafe. 31 or 37 journalists have been killed in the Northeast since 1987, and we all know about Gauri Lankesh, but there's this journalist from Tripura called Shantanu Bhaumik who was recently killed. And I think because of social media and because of the impact that it has, many people got to know about it, and there was also a protest in Delhi press club. But this is unprecedented. This has never happened before. We have had a journalist killed in Hibohagor in Assam because timber merchants actually killed him, and there hasn't been any conviction in all the cases that have been, that have happened. So I think we need more why we don't have dedicated environment reporters. Of course, we lack resources, and of course, we are afraid that there would be witch hunting on the part of the government. That is why. So I think we need more collaboration across the nation, outside the Northeast as well.
Amit, if you could very briefly answer that.
See, first thing you have to understand is whatever is grown in Sikkim is organic, because they are banned pesticides and all, not whatever is sold in Sikkim. And after it's gone organic, the organic produce is very less. It's sold within the state. Because economically also the organic products are not viable for the farmers, because actually the production has really gone down.
Right.
So
okay, maybe we need a separate panel on organic certification. But yeah, I think you raised a lot of valid points, and the safety of journalists and the fact that the Tripura incident got highlighted because it reached social media. There may be many such incidents happening to journalists. We just hope more stories come out of the Northeast. Thank you all so much for highlighting, along with the panel and the audience, for being so patient.
Can I just take last 2 minutes? Somebody can tell me what's common between journalists and generals in the army? They talk too much. The other thing is that I want to take an option here. I'm also involved with a social organization which deals with environment, the Club of Rome India chapter, and we have a conference in Bombay, this time on 16th and 17th November. It's on towards resource resilient India. We're looking at secondary raw materials, we're looking at circular economy, we're looking at, again, a facet of preservation of environment. So all those who are there in Bombay, please, I'll leave it with the Balipara Foundation, which of course is also involved with us in that particular event. Please take that, and all those who are there, please come and join us there and share your views. It'll be delightful to see all of you there in Bombay as well. And with that, may I just request all of you to please give this panel a big hand, and thank you very much for being a great audience.